And welcome students to the second half of our course. We are now getting into class definitions. So let's get started here. Classes are the single most important feature in modern object-oriented programming languages. Up to this point, we've dealt with a lot of the fundamental underlying features, such as things like loops, conditional statements, output, input. But now we're actually going to get into the meat of the programming language. And in this case, we're doing that through classes. Now, we've already seen examples of classes with both the scanner class, which we use to get keyboard input, and the string class, which of course we use to generate strings. An object is a value of a class type and is referred to then as an instance of the class. So any class objects are instances of that class. So like if we created a class, for example, called test class, and then we created an object in that, that object would be an instance of it. Now an object differs from a primitive type in that it has both methods, or actions, if you will, and data. If you think back to the very beginning when I had this like primitive box example, that was a good way to talk about the actions were the algorithms, so the arithmetic operations, and the data was the actual attributes. All right, for example, if we look at this quick example here, I have word equals quote hello. That's an object of the string class. It has both characters in the string data, and it also has access to a number of methods, including length. If you recall, we also have all like equals and compare to, ignore case, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of different methods that are accessible within that class. All right, let's review the terminology before we jump into classes. The first thing is an object. An object is a value of a class type. And an object has both data and methods, or actions, if you will. All right, we'll get more into methods as we start diving into this chapter. Speaking of methods, those are actions that the object can perform. Each object can have different data, but all objects of a class, such as string, have the same types of data, and all objects in the class have the same methods. So for example, if I have a string, let's say string S1 and string S2, and S1 equals hello, and string 2 is, S2 is world. Technically the data is different, but they have access to the exact same thing. Like we can still do, string dot length, we can do dot equals, we can do compare to, we can do all these different things on both strings. The methods don't change, but the data might. All right, the instance of an object, which is simply that an object belongs to a class. So that's like when we start saying, like in the example I just gave with string S2 or string S1, those would be the instance of that object. So here we have some code. Here's date first try demo in the class. And you can see I also had the output down there. And in here, you can see that we have our date first try, date 1, date 2. All right, these right here are our objects, and we're setting them equal to a new date first try. So this is how we determine what date 1, date 2 are. In terms of date first try, the big thing that we should look at is this class right here compared to this one. If you'll notice, this is what we're used to seeing over here. We have our public static void main string args. Over here, notice that line of code does not exist. And that's a very important distinction between that of the main method over here and that of a class which has other methods. So when we get into this chapter and we start looking at various different classes, we're going to start to see that, hey, over here we have some code that is going to be needed for this side over here. So here I have this date first try object. Date first try pretty much just tells the code to look for that class. Just like when, for example, when we did scanner objects, we had scanner keyboard. That means that in the Java library, there's a class that up here says scanner, and then inside of it is a bunch of methods. All right, the same thing goes on here. All right, then down here that you're invoking that object. So this is date1.month, date1.day, date1.year. All right, that's all going to be defined by these right here. So these are these ints. All right, and eventually we'll look at different methods that you can do with them. But this is just like when, for example, if we were talking still about the scanner class, when you did things like keyboard.nextInt or keyboard.next or .nextLine, those are all different things that are defined here in this class. Now, of course, in this example here, when I run this, this is what is produced. You can see we have date 1, and it calls the write output, and it just writes month, day, year, which we find here in our code. All right, let's break that stuff down now. Class definition. All right, the previous slide showed a class called date first try and a program that runs code from the class. The dates were both objects of that class. Now, this is a super simple version of what a class and how it works, but works fine for introducing the concept. All right, when we talk about the dates, of course, let me just turn back real quick. I'm referring to these two right here, date 1 and date 2. This particular class has 3 pieces of data. You have a string for the month, an int for the day, and an int for year. These are known as fields of the object, though more commonly known as instance variables. So again, going back to here, we have public string month, public int day, public int year. These are the types that are defined here in date first try. Now there's only one method, which we saw, which was write output. Now both the data items and the methods are what are known as members of the object. So these things comprise the date first try class. All right, let's talk about instance variables. The following lines define 3 instance variables: public string month, public int day, public int year, in which year is a 4-digit number. The word public simply means there is no restrictions on how these variables are used. We'll explore this later on when we talk more about private variables. An object of the class is typically named by a variable of the class type. So, for example, the program date first try demo declares 2 variables, date 1 and date 2, that are of type date first try. Makes sense. It's just like when we did our scanner object, we had, scanner keyboard. Scanner would be the class that you're calling. Now, let's use the new operator here, which is something that we may not realize that we've been doing, but it's something that we do have access to. All right, so our program can create the objects date 1 and date 2 as follows. So date first try, date 1, date 2. However, while this will give us the variables, there's no objects of the class actually being used. So even though we define, hey, here's date 1, date 2, they're not really being used at all. To obtain an object, we must first use the new operator to create a new instance of the object. So for example, the following creates an object of the class date first try and names it with the variable date 1. So date 1 equals new date first try. Right? And we have seen this kind of thing before when using the scanner class. So for example, KB equals new scanner system.in. So new simply just tells it the code to create that object. That's all it really is doing. Because if you don't do it, it doesn't create the object. Right. We now need to talk about constructors, which, while we will discuss this later on in the chapter, when we create a new instance of an object, this is what known as a constructor. And the general format of a constructor is the following. You have the class variable equal to new, which is that keyword we just talked about, class name. So for example, if we talk about the scanner class, that was like keyboard equals new scanner system.in. If we look at our date first try, that was like date 1 equals new date first try. This creates a new object of the specified class and associates it with the class variable. This is often then referred to as an object of the class. Now, let's talk about object creation statements. In our sample code, we have 2 statements. One, to declare the variable, and another, to assign it as an object. Typically, this is done, though, with a single statement, because you noticed before we did date 1, date first try, date 1, and then later on we said date 1 equals new date first try. What we want to do is rewrite that code into a single line, which is really more in line of how we've been doing it with the system processes that we've been doing. It's like scanner or things like that. So scanner keyboard equals new scanner system.in. rather than doing scanner keyboard and then another line, keyboard equals scanner system.in. We usually just put that all as one line. And here's we've rewritten our date first try code to date first try date 1 equals new date first try. All right, so here's our self-test question, folks. So that just concludes our notes for today, folks. So until next time.